David and his wife Maria had only been in their new house for 6 months when the letter arrived. It was taped to the front door in bold red ink, and the very sight of it made Maria pause before pulling it down. The paper was from the local homeowners association. The fine amount printed across the top read $3,500. The note said they had violated several community rules. It mentioned Maria's flower garden being non-standard, the wooden fence David had fixed himself being out of uniform, and even the color of the shutters being inappropriate for the neighborhood palette. Maria's hands trembled as she read. "This is ridiculous," she whispered. David took the letter, scanned it carefully, and frowned. "We paid for this house. We followed every code in the contract. They're trying to scare us." The signature at the bottom belonged to Karen, the head of the HOA. Everyone in the neighborhood already knew her name. She was sharp, loud, and always on patrol. People whispered that she enjoyed catching others breaking rules more than she enjoyed her own home. Maria wanted to ignore the letter. David wanted to challenge it. But neither of them expected how far Karen would go once her demands were ignored. That night, Maria placed the letter in a drawer and told herself she wouldn't let it ruin her week. What she didn't know was that Karen had already decided this was going to be a battle she would not lose. Would you like me to continue with part 2 right now, about Karen's next move, or would you prefer I prepare the entire 7-part story at once so you have the full piece ready? You said, Part 1, 800 words kalekho or interesting hunashia or third-person style malekniha or simple basic English ka. Don't use any violated word. So please avoid any violated content. Don't use ... ChatGPT said, got it white heavy check mark. You want part 1 to be around 800 words, written in third-person style, with simple basic English, engaging flow, and no inappropriate content. I'll expand the first part into a full-length, detailed chapter for you. Here's part 1, 800 words. Part 1, the letter on the door. David and his wife Maria moved into their new house only 6 months ago. It was a bright morning when Maria opened the front door and saw a piece of paper taped right across the middle of it. The paper had red letters printed on the top, bold and sharp, almost like a warning sign. She pulled it down quickly and read it. Her eyes widened. It was not just a note. It was a fine notice from the Neighborhood Homeowners Association. The amount was shocking. $3,500. Maria stood frozen on the doorstep, her heart beating fast. She read the words again, thinking she had misunderstood. The letter stated that they had violated several rules of the community. It listed 3 things in detail. The first was her flower garden in the front yard. The notice said the flowers were non-standard and did not follow community design. The second was the wooden fence that David had repaired by himself last month. It was declared out of uniform. The third was about the shutters on the windows. According to the paper, the color did not match the approved neighborhood palette. Maria whispered to herself, how can they do this? She walked inside and placed the paper on the kitchen table where the morning sunlight fell on it like a spotlight. She felt uneasy. David came into the kitchen a few minutes later with a cup of coffee in his hand. He noticed her pale face. What happened? He asked. Maria pointed at the paper. David set the cup down and read it slowly, line by line. His jaw tightened. He was calm on the surface but his eyes showed anger. This is nonsense, he said in a steady voice. We paid for this house. We followed all codes when we moved in. This is nothing but intimidation. Maria's voice shook as she said, but what if they keep adding fines? What if it grows bigger? David folded the paper neatly, placed it on the table, and looked straight at her. They cannot do this. They cannot make up rules just because they want control. We will not pay it. At the bottom of the letter was the signature. In big bold handwriting it said, Karen, HOA President. Maria already knew the name. Everyone in the neighborhood knew it. Karen was the type of person who seemed to watch every move of the families living there. She walked her dog every morning and every evening, but people said she did it mainly to check on lawns, fences, and driveways. She enjoyed pointing out mistakes. She enjoyed reminding others that she was in charge. When Maria first met her, Karen had smiled, but it was the kind of smile that felt forced. She spoke with a tone that sounded polite on the surface but sharp underneath. Maria had felt uncomfortable since that first meeting. Now, after seeing the fine, she understood what the neighbors meant when they warned her to stay on Karen's good side. Maria placed the paper in a drawer, thinking that maybe ignoring it would make it go away. But a small voice inside told her it would not be that simple. Karen was not the kind of person to let things go. That evening, Maria watered her flowers in the yard. She noticed curtains move in the house across the street. A shadow stood there for a moment before stepping away. Maria did not need to guess who it was. She knew Karen was watching. David joined her outside and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Do not worry. If they want to make this a fight, they will see they picked the wrong people." Maria tried to smile, but her heart was heavy. She had only wanted peace in this new home. She had dreamed of quiet mornings and friendly neighbors. Now she felt as if their new house was turning into a stage where someone else pulled the strings. That night, as Maria prepared dinner, she kept thinking about the fine. She wondered if Karen would knock on the door the next day or send another letter. She wondered if the neighbors would side with her or with them. David, however, seemed certain. He believed the fine was nothing more than pressure. He believed Karen had no real power beyond words. But both of them underestimated how far Karen was willing to go. While David and Maria sat together at dinner, their laughter soft and warm, across the street Karen sat at her desk with a notebook. She had already written the date, the house number, and the words "fine" ignored. She looked out of her window with narrowed eyes. "This will not be easy for them," she whispered to herself. And just like that, what started as a single letter on the door was about to grow into a battle neither David nor Maria had expected. The next morning, Maria opened the blinds in the living room. The street looked calm, with children riding bicycles and a few neighbors walking their dogs. Yet her mind was not calm at all. The memory of the fine letter still pressed on her thoughts. She hoped, at least for a day, that things would stay quiet. But by afternoon, another paper appeared in the mailbox. This time it was not taped to the door. It was folded inside an envelope with the same bold red ink on the top. Maria carried it inside with a sigh. She opened it while David was working on his laptop at the dining table. The letter repeated the earlier fine and added a warning. It said that failure to pay would result in further actions, though it did not explain what those actions might be. The words were written in a firm tone as if meant to scare them. Maria placed the paper down, her hands shaking slightly. "She will not stop," she said quietly. David closed his laptop, took the letter, and read it with steady eyes. "She is trying to push us. This is not legal. A garden of flowers cannot cost $3,500. Neither can a fence or a set of shutters. We are not paying a single coin until she explains herself properly." Maria nodded, though she felt uneasy. She wished the issue would vanish on its own. But deep down she knew it would not. Later that evening, as the sun lowered, Karen walked her dog past their yard. She did not smile. She did not greet them. She simply slowed her steps and looked at the flowers, then at the fence, then at the shutters. Her sharp gaze lingered as if she were making notes in her mind. Maria felt her cheeks heat with frustration. David, however, simply stood taller. He gave Karen a firm nod, one that showed he was not afraid. Karen lifted her chin and walked on, but Maria could tell this was not the end. The very next day, Maria heard voices outside. She peeked through the curtains and saw Karen standing with another neighbor, pointing toward their house. The neighbor nodded quietly, though he looked uncomfortable. Karen spoke with gestures, waving her hand at the shutters and then at the fence. It was clear she was gathering support. When David came home from work, Maria told him what she had seen. He listened carefully and then said, "Let her talk. The law does not stand on her side if she is inventing rules. What matters is how we respond." But Karen was already planning something bigger. She believed that authority meant control, and she was not ready to lose it. On the fourth day after the first fine, there was a knock on the door. Maria opened it and found Karen standing there with a clipboard. She was dressed neatly, her posture stiff, and her expression stern. "Good afternoon," Karen said in a cold tone. "I came to remind you about the unpaid fine. The community expects respect for the rules. Ignoring them is not acceptable." Maria's heart raced. She wanted to speak, but before she could, David appeared behind her. His voice was calm but firm. "We received your letters," David said. "But there is no legal explanation in them. You have no authority to demand this amount. Unless you can show real documents from the city, we will not pay." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. She tapped her pen on the clipboard. "Refusing to cooperate will only make matters worse," she warned. "The association has the right to escalate this." David did not flinch. "Then do what you think you must. But do not expect us to hand over money for nothing." Karen glared at him, then turned and walked away, her steps sharp on the pavement. That evening, Maria tried to enjoy dinner, but she could not shake the image of Karen's stern face. She asked softly, "What if she actually calls someone? What if she involves the police?" David gave a small smile, though his eyes were serious. "If she calls the police, then she will expose herself. They will see the truth. Let her try." Maria wanted to believe him, but she felt the storm was getting closer. 2 days later, the storm arrived. It was early morning when Maria heard a knock on the door, louder this time. She opened it and froze. A police officer stood there. His car was parked on the street, and Karen was standing a few steps behind him with folded arms and a look of triumph on her face. Maria's breath caught in her throat. She called for David, who came quickly to the door. The officer greeted them politely and said, "We received a complaint from the Homeowners Association. They claim you are refusing to comply with community rules." Karen's eyes gleamed as if she had already won. She expected David and Maria to panic. She expected them to fold under the side of authority. But what happened next was something Karen had not prepared for at all. The morning air was quiet, but the knock on the door had turned it heavy. Maria stood beside David, her fingers gripping the edge of her sweater as the police officer repeated his words. "We received a complaint," he said in a steady voice. "The Homeowners Association reports a fine of $3,500 that has not been paid. They claim you are refusing to follow the community rules." Karen stood behind him with her arms crossed, her chin lifted proudly. Her eyes sparkled with the thrill of power. She believed she had cornered them at last. David remained calm. He looked at the officer directly and asked, "Sir, can you tell me if refusing to pay a private fine is a crime under city law?" The officer shifted his weight, glanced at Karen, then back at David. "That depends on the legality of the fine," he said carefully. "The HOA claims you are bound to their regulations." Karen stepped forward quickly. "Exactly," she said with a sharp tone. "They moved here, they signed the papers, and they owe the association. If they ignore the rules, there must be consequences." Maria wanted to protest, but her voice caught in her throat. David placed a reassuring hand on her arm and said firmly, "Officer, please step inside for a moment. I think you should hear the full story." The officer looked uncertain but nodded. Karen's eyes widened. "There is no need for that," she snapped. But the officer raised his hand to silence her. "I will listen," he said. "That is part of my duty." David guided the officer into the living room while Karen remained at the door, looking restless. Maria sat down on the couch, while David stood near the table where he had placed the letters from the HOA. He handed them to the officer. "These are the notices we received," David explained. "As you can see, they mention flowers, fences, and shutter colors. None of these are legal grounds for a fine of this size. We paid for this property in full, and nowhere in the official city documents does it say that a garden or paint color requires such payment. This is harassment, not law." The officer read the letters carefully. His brow furrowed deeper with each line. Finally, he looked up at David. "Sir," the officer asked, "what is your full name?" David gave it. The officer froze. His eyes widened slightly. He repeated the name as if trying to confirm it. "You are Judge David?" he asked quietly. Maria's heart skipped a beat. Karen's voice cut in from the door, "What difference does that make?" The officer turned sharply toward her, his face serious. "It makes all the difference. Judge David is not only a resident of this neighborhood. He serves in the district court. I know his record. I have seen him preside over several cases." Karen's smug smile fell. Her face lost color. She opened her mouth to speak but no words came out. David remained calm. "Yes," he said evenly. "I serve as a judge. And that is why I know this fine holds no legal weight. It is intimidation. My wife and I chose this home for peace, not for conflict. But if the association continues to invent penalties, I will have no choice but to take legal action myself." The officer stood straighter. His voice carried authority now. "Mrs. Karen," he said firmly, "I must inform you that a false report to the police is a serious matter. Calling law enforcement to enforce personal disputes is misuse of public resources. This is not a criminal case. It is an attempt to pressure your neighbor." Karen stammered. I was only protecting the community. The rules must be respected." The officer narrowed his eyes. "The community rules cannot override city law. And certainly not when applied unfairly. From what I see, this fine is without basis. I strongly suggest you reconsider your approach before this escalates further." Maria watched as Karen's confidence melted away. Her hands clutched the clipboard tightly, her knuckles turning white. She muttered something under her breath, then turned and walked away quickly, her dog tugging at the leash as if eager to escape the tension. The officer handed the letters back to David. "Sir, I apologize for the disturbance. Clearly, this was not a legal matter. If there are further issues, please report them directly. I assure you, the department will take it seriously if harassment continues." David thanked him, his tone respectful. "I appreciate your fairness, officer. My wife and I only want to live peacefully." The officer gave a respectful nod to both David and Maria, then left. The sound of his car pulling away felt like a weight lifting from the air. Maria turned to David, her voice still shaky. "For a moment, I thought she had won. I thought we would be forced to pay or worse." David gave her a gentle smile. "That is what she wanted. Fear is her tool. But the truth is stronger." Maria sat down slowly, trying to calm her racing heart. She realized that this was not just about flowers or fences anymore. It was about standing firm against unfairness. Karen had tried to use rules as a weapon, but now she had been exposed. Still, Maria knew Karen would not stop so easily. She had seen the fire in Karen's eyes. Even after being warned, Karen would not rest until she tried another way. As evening came and the sky turned golden, Maria looked out at the street. The curtains across the way moved again. Karen was there, watching. Even after being humbled, she was not finished. And Maria understood that the true battle had only just begun. The next few days passed with a strange calm. Maria tried to go back to her normal routine. She watered her flowers, baked bread, and waved to neighbors. David focused on his work at the court, returning home in the evenings with his usual calm smile. But beneath the surface, both of them knew that Karen was not finished. They saw her walking around the neighborhood more often than before, speaking to people on their lawns, pointing toward David and Maria's house, and shaking her head dramatically as if telling a sad story. One evening, Maria overheard two neighbors talking near the mailbox. One of them said, "Karen is planning something big. She wants to call a special HOA meeting." The other sighed and replied, "She never quits, does she?" Maria's chest tightened as she walked back inside. "David," she said, "she is planning a meeting about us." David listened without surprise. "I expected this," he replied calmly. "Let her call her meeting. We will attend. We will speak. The truth will stand." A week later, the notice arrived. Each house in the neighborhood received a letter inviting them to an urgent HOA gathering at the community hall. The notice claimed that serious violations threaten the harmony of our neighborhood. Though it did not mention names, everyone knew who it was about. On the evening of the meeting, Maria felt nervous as she dressed in a simple blue dress. David wore a neat gray suit. He wanted to show respect but also strength. As they walked to the hall, Maria whispered, "What if the neighbors believe her lies?" David squeezed her hand gently. "Then we show them the truth." The community hall was already crowded when they arrived. People filled the chairs, and a low murmur of voices floated through the air. At the front stood Karen with her clipboard, her expression sharp and commanding. She banged the table with a small wooden gavel to get everyone's attention. "Thank you all for coming," she began in a firm tone. "As president of this association, it is my duty to protect the beauty and order of our community. Recently, however, one household has chosen to ignore our rules. Their actions threaten the standards we all worked hard to maintain." Several neighbors glanced at David and Maria. Maria lowered her gaze, but David held his head high. Karen continued. "We gave them clear warnings. We issued a fine. Yet they refused to pay. Instead, they disrespected our authority. If such behavior spreads, our neighborhood will lose its value. Our streets will lose their charm." She paused, letting her words sink in. Some neighbors nodded slowly, while others looked unsure. Then Karen pointed toward David and Maria. "We are here to decide what must be done. If they cannot follow the rules, should they be allowed to stay?" A quiet gasp moved through the room. Maria's heart pounded. She whispered, "She wants to force us out." David stood slowly, waiting until the room grew silent again. His voice was calm but clear. "May I speak?" Karen frowned but nodded. "Go ahead." David stepped forward. "Neighbors, my wife and I chose this community because we believed it would be a place of peace and kindness. We respected every law of the city. We paid for our home honestly. But what you see here is not law. It is control. A garden of flowers, a repaired fence, and a set of shutters are not crimes. They are not worth thousands of dollars. They are only excuses to take money and power." He held up the letters Karen had sent. "Look at these notices. Do you see any reference to real city regulations? Do you see signatures from officials? No. Because they do not exist. This is not about harmony. This is about fear." The room grew quiet. Some neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Others looked at Karen with doubt. Karen quickly interrupted. "Do not be fooled. He is trying to twist the truth. Rules are rules. Without them, there is chaos." David's eyes remained steady. "Rules must be fair. Rules must serve the people, not crush them. If anyone here believes otherwise, then ask yourselves what will stop the next fine from landing on your door? What will stop this same treatment from happening to your family?" His words echoed in the hall. A neighbor in the back raised his hand and said, "I received a letter once about the height of my grass. I paid, but I always wondered why it was so expensive. Another neighbor nodded. She fined me for parking my car slightly off-center. I never spoke up because I thought I had no choice. Murmurs spread across the room. Karen's face grew tense. She tapped her clipboard hard against the table. Enough. This is not about me. This is about standards. But now the crowd no longer looked fully convinced. A few people whispered to each other. Some even avoided Karen's gaze. Maria felt a flicker of hope. For the first time, Karen's control was slipping. David closed his statement with a calm voice. We are not against the community. We want beauty, peace, and respect just as much as you. But we will not be bullied. And I believe none of you deserve to be bullied either. Silence followed. Then slowly, a few people clapped. Others joined. Soon, the sound of applause filled the hall. Karen's face turned red. She banged the gavel again, but the sound of support for David drowned her out. Maria felt tears in her eyes. Not of sadness, but of relief. For once, it seemed the neighbors were seeing the truth. Still, she knew this was not the end. Karen's pride would not allow her to surrender so easily. And as the meeting ended, Karen's eyes burned with silent fury. Maria understood one thing clearly. The battle was far from over. After the heated meeting at the community hall, David and Maria walked home with a sense of relief. The sound of applause still echoed in Maria's ears, giving her hope that the neighborhood was beginning to see through Karen's ways. For the first time in weeks, Maria slept peacefully. She believed the worst might be over. But David was less certain. He knew pride could be more dangerous than power. And Karen's pride had been wounded in front of the entire community. The following morning, Maria watered her flowers as usual. The sun was soft, and a gentle breeze moved through the trees. For a moment, she felt free again. But then she noticed Karen standing across the street, speaking quietly to another neighbor. Karen's sharp eyes glanced at Maria briefly before turning away. Maria's heart sank. When David returned home that evening, Maria told him what she saw. He nodded calmly. She will not forgive easily. But whatever she does next, we will face it together. Days passed. The neighborhood seemed quieter, though Maria could feel tension in the air, like a storm waiting to break. Then, one afternoon, a new envelope appeared in their mailbox. This time, it was not from the HOA. It was from the city office. Maria opened it carefully, her hands trembling. Her eyes widened as she read. David, it is a formal complaint, she whispered. David took the letter and read it himself. The words stated that someone had filed a complaint about their property, accusing them of violating zoning codes and building standards. The complaint claimed the fence was unsafe, the shutters were improperly installed, and the garden created hazards. Maria covered her mouth. She went to the city. David placed the letter on the table and sighed. I expected this. When she failed to control us with her fines, she turned to a bigger authority. But lies do not become truth just because they are written on official paper. The next week, a city inspector arrived. He was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a clipboard. He greeted David and Maria politely. I am here to follow up on the complaint, he explained. Karen was not far behind. She stood at the corner with her dog, pretending to adjust the leash while keeping her eyes fixed on them. The inspector examined the fence first. David explained how he had repaired it himself, using solid wood and proper nails. The inspector knocked on the panels, tested their strength, and nodded. This fence is sturdy. No safety issue here, he said. Then he looked at the shutters. David showed him the brackets and screws he had used. The inspector measured them, checked the alignment, and again gave a small nod. Installed correctly. No violation here either. Finally, he looked at the garden. Maria stood nervously beside him, explaining how she planted flowers carefully, leaving space for walking paths and ensuring nothing blocked visibility. The inspector smiled softly. "This garden is not a hazard. It is beautiful." Maria felt her chest lighten at his words. The inspector closed his clipboard. "From what I see, there are no violations. I will file my report stating this property is in good order." At that moment, Karen walked forward quickly. "Wait," she said sharply. "You must have missed something. Look again at the fence. Look again at the shutters. I am telling you, this property is lowering the value of the neighborhood." The inspector frowned. "Ma'am, with respect, value is not my department. My job is to check safety and code compliance. And from what I see, everything is fine." Karen's face grew red. "But you cannot just leave it like this. They are breaking the rules." The inspector gave her a firm look. "The city does not enforce HOA rules. If you want control, that is between the association and its members. But there is no legal violation here." David stood silently, his arms folded, watching Karen struggle to respond. Maria felt almost sorry for her, though she knew Karen would never feel the same. The inspector tipped his hat politely to David and Maria. "I will close this case. Have a good day." He walked away, leaving Karen standing on the sidewalk, her mouth open but no words coming out. When the inspector's car drove away, Karen glared at David. "This is not over," she hissed before storming off. Maria leaned against the fence, her knees weak with relief. "She will never stop, will she?" David shook his head softly. "Some people cannot let go of control. But every step she takes only reveals the truth more clearly." That night, Maria sat at the window, watching the quiet street. Neighbors passed by, some giving her small nods of encouragement. She realized that more people were beginning to see through Karen's false authority. But she also knew that Karen's pride had been cut even deeper now. And a person with wounded pride often strikes harder the next time. As the clock ticked past midnight, Maria whispered a silent hope that Karen would finally give up. But in her heart, she feared the battle was only moving to a new level. The days after the city inspector's visit were strangely quiet. For the first time in weeks, Maria felt she could breathe. She spent mornings tending her flowers without fear of seeing a letter taped to her door. David read his newspaper in peace, sipping coffee as if life was normal again. But deep inside, Maria knew the silence was not real peace. It felt more like the stillness before a storm. Karen had vanished from her usual patrols. She no longer stood on the sidewalks pointing at fences. She no longer lingered outside during her dog walks. Neighbors noticed too. "Strange," one of them whispered to Maria. "I have not seen her in days." David, however, was not fooled. "She is planning something," he said calmly. "She will not disappear without a reason." Maria nodded. She wanted to believe Karen was tired, but her heart told her otherwise. Her fears proved correct one Saturday afternoon. David and Maria were preparing lunch when they heard another knock on the door. It was firm, official, and carried the same weight as the one from the police officer weeks before. David opened the door. Standing outside were two uniformed men. They were not police officers but security officers hired by the Homeowners Association. Behind them stood Karen, her arms crossed and her expression full of determination. "Good afternoon," one of the men said politely. "We have been instructed by the HOA to deliver an eviction notice." Maria gasped. "Eviction," she whispered. Karen stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Yes. Since you refuse to follow the rules, the association has voted to remove you from the neighborhood. You have 30 days to leave this property." David took the paper from the officer and read it carefully. His face remained calm, though Maria could see the anger in his eyes. The letter was printed with HOA stamps and Karen's signature at the bottom. It claimed that repeated violations gave the association the right to reclaim the property. David looked up slowly. "This notice has no legal power," he said firmly. "The association does not own this house. My wife and I bought it with our money. Only a court can issue eviction. And I assure you, no court would accept this false claim." Karen smirked. "We will see about that. I will take this matter as far as it needs to go." The officers looked uncomfortable. One of them cleared his throat. "Sir, we are only here to deliver the paper. We cannot enforce it." "You are right, this would need a court order." Karen's eyes flashed with irritation. "Do not listen to him," she snapped. "The association has authority." David folded the paper neatly and handed it back. "Not authority over ownership. This is harassment, and if you continue, it will end in a real courtroom." For the first time, Maria saw hesitation flicker across Karen's face. But she quickly covered it with her usual sharpness. She turned to the neighbors who had gathered at a distance to watch. "Do you see?" she shouted. "They think they are above the rules. They think they can ignore the entire community." Some neighbors shook their heads, but others whispered to each other. It was clear that Karen's influence was slipping. Her desperation made her words sound more like noise than authority. When Karen finally stormed off, Maria sat down heavily at the kitchen table. Her hands trembled as she poured water into a glass. "She will never stop, David. She will push until there is nothing left." David sat beside her and spoke gently. "She is pushing because she feels her power fading. The more she strikes, the weaker her position becomes. But we must stay strong. If she tries to drag this into court, then we will answer her there." Maria nodded, though her heart still felt heavy. That evening, the neighborhood was buzzing with talk. Some people came quietly to Maria and whispered, "We are on your side." Others said, "Karen is going too far this time." A few remained silent, caught between fear of Karen and respect for David. Later that night, as Maria sat near the window, she saw lights on in Karen's house. Through the curtains, Karen paced back and forth with her phone pressed to her ear. Her gestures were wild, her movements restless. It was clear she was plotting her next step. Maria whispered softly to herself, "She is not finished. She will take us to court." And Maria was right. The following week, an official letter arrived. This time, it carried the seal of the county court. Karen had filed a civil case against David and Maria, claiming they had violated the HOA contract and demanding their removal. Maria's heart raced as she held the paper. She looked at David with fear in her eyes. She actually did it? David read the document carefully, then placed it on the table. His face remained steady. "Yes. And now, for the first time, she has entered the one place where truth cannot be twisted, the court." Maria asked softly, "Are you worried?" David gave her a small smile. "No. In fact, this is exactly where I wanted it to go. She thinks she is dragging us into her battlefield, but she has stepped into mine." Maria looked at him with surprise. For the first time, she felt a flicker of confidence. The storm Karen had created was about to move into the courtroom. And in that place, her power, her fines, and her threats would face the light of truth. The morning of the hearing arrived with heavy clouds in the sky. Maria woke early, her heart beating fast. She stood by the window, staring at the street, and whispered to herself, "Today everything will end." David dressed in a neat black suit, his face calm and steady. He placed a reassuring hand on Maria's shoulder. "Do not worry," he said softly. "The truth has a voice of its own." They drove to the courthouse together. Maria kept her eyes on the road, feeling both fear and hope. David, however, remained quiet, as if already preparing for the battle ahead. When they entered the courtroom, Karen was already there. She sat at the plaintiff's table, her posture stiff, her eyes sharp. She wore a dark dress and clutched a folder filled with papers. Around her sat a few neighbors who still supported her, though their expressions looked uncertain. The judge entered, and everyone stood. Maria felt a strange comfort, because she knew her husband had walked into this room countless times before. This was his place of work, his place of truth. The judge began the session. We are here to hear the case brought by the Homeowners Association against Mr. David and Mrs. Maria. The claim involves alleged violations of community rules and a demand for removal. Karen stood quickly, her voice firm but sharp. Your Honor, these residents have ignored every rule of our neighborhood. They planted a garden that is not approved, repaired a fence without permission, and painted shutters in a color outside our palette. They refused to pay the fine, they disrespected our authority, and they are a danger to the order of our community. She handed the judge a stack of documents. Here are the notices and records of their refusal. The judge skimmed the papers and asked, do these documents include signatures from city officials? Karen hesitated. No, Your Honor, but the association has the right to make decisions for the neighborhood. The judge nodded slowly but said nothing more. Then it was David's turn. He stood with quiet strength, his voice steady. Your Honor, these notices are not based on city law. They are personal opinions written by one individual. My wife and I have followed every legal code. Our fence is safe, our shutters are installed correctly, and our garden is no hazard. A city inspector has already confirmed this in an official report. He handed the judge the inspector's findings. Here is the proof. The judge read the report carefully. His brow relaxed. I see no violations of city or state law. Continue. David turned to the courtroom, his voice carrying across the space. This is not about rules. This is about control. My wife and I bought our home with honest money. We respect our neighbors. But the head of this association has used fear and false authority to pressure not only us but others in this community. Today we stand here not just for ourselves, but for every neighbor who has been silenced by unfair fines. Murmurs filled the room. A few neighbors who had supported Karen lowered their eyes. Others nodded slowly in agreement with David's words. Karen rose again, her voice growing desperate. Do not listen to him. He is twisting the story. Without rules, this neighborhood will collapse. We must protect our values. The judge looked at her with calm eyes. Rules are important, yes. But rules must be fair, and they must align with the law. You cannot create penalties that have no legal foundation. You cannot demand thousands of dollars for flowers, fences, or paint. That is not protection of values. That is abuse of power. Karen's face turned pale. She tried to speak again, but her words stumbled. The judge continued firmly. The court finds no evidence that Mr. David and Mrs. Maria violated any legal codes. The fine of $3,500 is invalid. The claim for removal is dismissed with prejudice. Maria felt tears of relief fill her eyes. She squeezed David's hand tightly. The judge added, furthermore, this court advises the Homeowners Association to review its leadership and practices. Misuse of authority damages trust and harmony. If such actions continue, legal consequences will follow. The gavel struck, and the case was closed. Karen sat frozen, her folder slipping from her hands. The neighbors who had followed her stood silently, some shaking their heads as they walked out. The once proud leader of the HOA now looked small and powerless. Maria and David rose. Neighbors came to them, some offering smiles, others whispering, "We are glad you stood up." "Thank you." As they left the courtroom, Maria looked up at David. "You were right," she said softly. "The truth did have a voice." David smiled gently. "It always does, even if it takes time." When they returned home, the street felt different. Neighbors greeted them warmly, no longer avoiding eye contact. Even the air felt lighter. Maria walked to her flowers, kneeling to touch the petals. For the first time in months, she felt safe in her own home. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Maria looked across the street. Karen's house was dark. The curtains were drawn, and no movement showed behind them. The once watchful eyes were gone. Maria whispered, "It is over." David placed his arm around her shoulder. "Yes. And now we can finally live the life we dreamed of when we came here." And so, after weeks of fear and struggle, peace returned to their home. The battle had ended, not with fines or threats, but with truth standing firm against false power.